Gurmagat Cahirlock, and I'd like to welcome you all. I think this is a really good opportunity for us to discuss what we need to discuss here. And really in your statements, I think written all across it is the vision that you have for the opportunities that presented and the collective responsibility then on us all to make sure that those visions and the opportunities are maximised there. So I think we're on the right road. So we'll have a bit of a deeper dig into how we might do that. And I suppose my first question to you would be to ask you, how concerned are you to see that the future funding announcement made no mention of reforming the actual funding model or addressing the two-tier funding system in higher education, and that the 60-40 split, and I say 50-50, will still remain? And Jim, in your opening statement, you talk about how traditional universities are incentivised to increase places and then they get more funding, obviously, per student. And it's my understanding that all institutes of higher education are allocated a share of the overall funding envelope based on the number of students, meaning that the more students, the larger your share is. But the more students overall in the system, the less funding per students it would mean in the way that it's done. So I'd like to just give you an opportunity to expand on that, because I think it's concerning. And even with the recent announcement that there'll be more places provided again this year, that's fine, they're announcements. But if that's not underpinned with the resources per student, then I think we're setting up for certainly not for success there. So I'd ask you to elaborate on your point, to explain to me how the system works differently for the TUs as compared with the traditional universities. I have a few more questions, but maybe if you could just address that, explain it.
This is a major concern, and I can see it impacting already, even as we start this whole process. And I would hope that coming from this committee with your report, that you will make a very strong recommendation as regards funding and parity of funding, yes, and at least that 50-50 split of money, because it's the same numbers of students that's going to TUs as traditional universities, yeah, and as I mentioned, and you
were you expecting to see it in the future of funding paper? To see that
well, I suppose it's out there for discussion, but I think from my own experience of doing reports from committees in the past, I'll just give you one brief example. I did a report here on women in sport, for example, back in 2004, and it was noticed by the then Minister, John O'Donoghue, and he ring-fenced money for women in sport. I mean, citing as an example. So I think this committee, because I looked at the work online that you've done, and I'd like to compliment you on how thorough you've done, on what you've done, as thorough, I would say, as any committee ever that explored anything here in the House. So I think a strong recommendation from here is so important. If the TUs are to achieve their ambition, which we all understand and agree with, then they have to be just funded properly. And Paddy here, coming from the traditional universities, I'm sure would really understand that as well. So it's a big issue, and I, as chairperson of the MTU, would be very conscious of it. I have passed on this to the Minister, and previously I wasn't aware really that there was such a differentiation between traditional and institutes of technology. So basically, I suppose it's carrying just the same formula forward for the MTUs as was in existence. So I would be stressing this as chairperson while I'm in this position, to the Minister, to the Taoiseach, and I totally agree with you, Deputy Conway, that this is a big issue.
Okay, we hear what you're saying, and I'll just move on to the next question, because I suppose it's kind of related, and Paddy, it might be better, Patrick, for yourself to answer this, because I share your ambition for the technological universities, obviously, but also the fact that we need to think about what investment we need to make to produce the kind of a world-class institutes they have the potential to be. And developing the research capabilities in the technological sector is key, as you said yourself. Horizon, is a €100 billion fund to support research and is a good proxy for research performance in institutes. It's also a vitally important source of funding for the institutes of higher education, Since 2014, Ireland has drawn down over €1 billion worth of research funding, 618 million of this by third-level institutes, the rest by private companies, but less than 10% went to the institutes of technology and the technological universities. That was 53.7 million. And to highlight the issue further, take the institutes of technology that make up, say, the Atlantic Technology University. They have only won 1.9 million since 2014. That's just under 0.2% of Ireland's total. And I believe that we can catch up and we can bridge the gap, but not without doing something very different than what we're doing now. So I know you have outlined some in your statement of what needs to be done to address this disparity in research capacity, but do you see the future funding announcement as sufficient to achieve that? What we need to do, I'm very conscious in terms of the resources that are needed in order to be able to draw that funding and access that funding in the first place. So what do you need? I know you've outlined some of them there, but...
Yeah, I suppose we need two things. We need the constraints to be taken off the technological university sector. You might not know this, but the contracts that academic staff can be offered and the remuneration of them within technological universities is very much less than in traditional universities. So we in the technological universities need to have that constraint taken off to allow us to compete in the market for top-class academics that can compete for this European funding, and indeed to incentivise academics already employed in the TU sector to compete for this European funding, because you're right, there's plenty of money on the table for research Europe-wide, and the technological university sector wants to play a greater role in successfully getting this money into Ireland. So different kinds of academic contracts are needed, and a little bit more flexibility in how we manage those contracts are needed. Then we need, I believe, the state to make an investment in money in the technological universities. Capital investment to upgrade the buildings, because you can't do top quality European research in much of the current infrastructure that we have, certainly in SETU. We need then also capacity building, hiring staff to compete for those research funds. So I would say for every euro investment in that kind of infrastructure, capital investment in people, we will get that back many times over in successfully competing for European research funds. Because as you said, there's significant amounts of money out there, but we need to have the people incentivised and the resources and infrastructure to go with successfully competing for that funding.
How quickly do you need that?
Well, you know, I think it should have been done before now, but Horizon Europe is already up and running. But, you know, there will be a successor fund. So whatever investments we make now, we will be competing for successor funds in the future. I think that we shouldn't let a year go by before we have some sort of programme for investment in technological universities.
Okay, thank you.